The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass, but the peaceful evening was shattered by the sharp, grating voice of Karen. "That dog is a violation of HOA policy," she spat, arms crossed over her floral print blouse. Her expression, a mix of feigned authority and outright disdain, was locked onto my neighbor Tom, who stood rigid on his porch, gripping his service dog's harness. Buddy, a golden retriever with a gentle disposition, sat patiently at Tom's side. His tail wagged slightly, sensing his owner's tension. Tom's fingers tightened around the handle, his knuckles turning white. "He's not a pet," he said, voice measured. "He's my guide dog." Karen's lips curled into something resembling a smirk. "That's irrelevant. HOA rules are clear. No pets over 20 pounds. That thing is 100 if he's an ounce." I watched from my porch, jaw tightening. I had seen enough of Karen's antics to know where this was heading. She ran the HOA like a personal fiefdom, wielding bylaws like a weapon against anyone who dared challenge her control. Tonight, her target was Tom, a quiet, independent man who had lived here longer than she had. And she was picking a fight he couldn't see coming. Tom exhaled slowly. "The Americans with Disabilities Act protects service animals. Your HOA rule doesn't override federal law." Karen scoffed. "We have our own rules." I pushed off the porch railing and strode over, cutting through the tension like a blade. "And the law says you can't discriminate against people with disabilities," I said evenly. "You don't get to make up your own version of it." Her eyes flicked to me, lips pursing. "This doesn't concern you, Jake?" "Funny, I live here too." I folded my arms. "Which means I'm pretty interested in how the HOA operates. Especially when it's threatening my neighbor for no reason." Karen's cheeks flushed a blotchy red, but she didn't back down. "HOA regulations exist to maintain property values. A big dog like that could make people uncomfortable." Tom let out a sharp breath. "You mean you're uncomfortable?" Karen's gaze flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. The truth was she didn't care about the rules. She cared about control. And Tom, with his quiet defiance, was a problem she wanted to erase. I shook my head. "You can write all the notices you want, Karen, but legally you don't have a case. He has every right to live here with Buddy." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "If that's how you want to play it, fine. But don't be surprised when you start getting fines in the mail." She turned sharply on her heel and stalked off down the sidewalk, heels clicking against the pavement. Tom exhaled, his grip on Buddy's harness loosening slightly. "She's not going to let this go." I glanced after Karen's retreating figure. No, she wouldn't. She had taken this personally, and people like her didn't back down, they doubled down. "You're not fighting this alone," I said. Tom hesitated, then nodded once. "Thanks, Jake." I watched as he turned back toward his house, Buddy guiding him up the steps with practiced ease. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I knew Karen well enough to be sure of one thing: she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next morning the first shot was fired. A crisp white envelope was taped to Tom's front door, stamped with the HOA's official seal. He stood on his porch, running his fingers over the embossed letters. I stepped closer as he pulled out the letter, unfolding it carefully. The words were typed in Karen's signature condescending tone. "Immediate notice of violation. Fine, $500. Failure to comply will result in further penalties. ****. Tom's jaw clenched, the paper crinkling slightly in his grip. She wasted no time. I took the letter from him, scanning it. "She's bluffing. This isn't even legally enforceable. She's betting I don't have the money to fight it," Tom said, voice tight. And maybe he didn't. HOA disputes could drag on for months, even years. Karen was hoping to wear him down, to make his life miserable enough that he'd give in. I pulled out my phone. "I know someone who might be able to help." Tom frowned. "Who?" I hit call, waiting for the familiar voice to pick up. A gruff voice answered on the third ring. "This better be good, Jake." I smirked. "Hey, Mark. Ever wanted to take down a corrupt HOA?" Silence. Then a low chuckle. "You know I live for this kind of thing." I glanced at Tom, then at the notice in my hand. Karen thought she was untouchable. She had no idea what was coming. The first fine was just the beginning. By the end of the week, Tom had received 3 more notices, each with a new penalty tacked on: $750 for failure to comply, $1,000 for continued violation, and a final warning threatening legal action. Karen wasn't just flexing her authority. She was trying to bleed him dry. I watched as he sifted through the stack of letters at his kitchen table, fingers grazing the embossed HOA seal. His face remained impassive, but the tension in his shoulders told me everything. She's trying to force me out, he murmured. I exhaled slowly. She's banking on you giving up. Tom set the papers aside and reached down, rubbing Buddy's head. The golden retriever gave a soft whine, pressing into his side as if sensing his frustration. She underestimated me, he said finally. But what do we do? I slid my phone across the table. Mark's already digging. He used to handle fraud cases at the FBI. If there's dirt on Karen, he'll find it. Tom gave a small, humorless chuckle. I like him already. 2 days later, Mark showed up at my door, wearing his usual no-nonsense expression. He had the look of a man who'd spent too many years in interrogation rooms, sharp-eyed, always watching. The kind of guy who could make someone confess just by tilting his head. She's dirty, he said without preamble, stepping inside. I grinned. That was fast. Mark handed me a folder, crisp and thick. It wasn't hard. The HOA's been collecting way more in fees than they've been reporting. Money's going somewhere, but it sure as hell isn't going into neighborhood maintenance. I flipped through the pages, asterisk asterisk bank records, expense reports, discrepancies that screamed embezzlement. Asterisk asterisk. She's skimming, I muttered. Not just her, Mark said. A couple of board members are in on it. But Karen? She's the ringleader. Tom sat forward, hands clasped. So we have leverage? Mark smirked. We have a bomb. But Karen wasn't finished playing dirty. The next morning I woke up to shouting outside. I threw on a hoodie and stepped onto my porch, immediately spotting the source of the commotion. 2 animal control officers standing on Tom's lawn. Karen stood nearby, arms folded, lips curled in satisfaction. Sir, one of the officers said to Tom, we've received reports that your dog is a threat to the community. Tom's brow furrowed. A threat? He's aggressive, Karen chimed in. Multiple neighbors have complained. I scoffed. That's a lie and you know it. The officers exchanged glances. Buddy, in the meantime, was doing the worst possible thing for Karen's argument. Asterisk asterisk sitting politely with his tongue hanging out, looking like he wanted belly rubs. Asterisk asterisk. One of the officers sighed. Look, the complaint says the dog has been barking aggressively, lunging at people. We have to follow up. Tom's jaw tightened. Buddy is a trained guide dog, he doesn't bark. He doesn't lunge. I stepped forward. This is harassment. She's been trying to get rid of him for weeks. Karen feigned shock. I'm just following neighborhood safety protocols. Mark, who had been standing silently by my side, let out a quiet laugh. The kind that sent a chill down your spine. You filed a false report, he said, stepping forward. Which, by the way, is a crime. Karen's smug expression faltered. I was just relaying concerns from. Mark pulled a small notebook from his pocket and flipped it open. Animal control records show 0 complaints from anyone except you. Interesting. He tilted his head. That makes it look real personal, Karen. She swallowed hard, but her bravado returned quickly. I don't need to justify myself to you. This is an HOA matter. Mark chuckled. You should worry less about HOA rules and more about federal fraud charges. The color drained from her face. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. The officers, clearly uninterested in being part of whatever Karen had stirred up, turned to Tom. Your dog is fine. Sorry for the inconvenience. As they walked off, Karen's nails dug into her crossed arms. She turned on her heel, muttering something under her breath before storming back to her house. Tom let out a breath. She's getting desperate. Mark smirked. Let's make her even more desperate. By nightfall we had a plan. Karen had played her hand. She thought she could intimidate, threaten, and manipulate her way into getting what she wanted. But she'd underestimated who she was dealing with. She thought Tom was defenseless. She thought I was just an annoyed neighbor. She had no idea we were about to tear her empire down. Karen had no idea she was already sinking. She was still playing offense, throwing around fines and threats like she was untouchable. What she didn't realize was that Mark, Tom, and I weren't just fighting back. We were setting a trap. The first step was simple: expose her greed. Mark had uncovered clear evidence of embezzlement. Thousands of dollars in HOA funds had mysteriously disappeared into administrative fees, which conveniently seemed to funnel right into Karen's personal accounts. The board members? Either complicit or too spineless to challenge her. We needed more than just numbers on a page. We needed her own words to bury her. So we baited her. I ran into Karen the next morning while she was pretending to inspect a neighbor's flower beds, probably searching for another imaginary violation to find someone over. Karen, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Look, I get it. Rules are rules. But all this over one dog? You've already fined Tom nearly $3,000. She arched a perfectly penciled brow. Maybe he should follow the rules like everyone else. I folded my arms. Come on. We both know the fines aren't really about the dog. Her lips pursed, but I saw it. The flicker of arrogance, the need to gloat. You wouldn't understand, she said finally, lowering her voice. Managing a community takes strategy. If I let one person break the rules, the whole neighborhood falls apart. People stop respecting authority. The HOA stops making money. Bingo. I pretended to think about it. I guess that makes sense. But, fines can't be the HOA's main source of income, right? She actually laughed. You'd be surprised. People are careless. And if they don't pay. She smirked. We put liens on their homes. HOA always gets its cut. I made sure my phone, tucked casually in my pocket, was still recording. Mark nearly fell out of his chair laughing when I played the audio for him that night. She admitted it, she straight up confessed to extortion, I said, shaking my head. Ego, Mark said, smirking. It's always ego that takes people like her down. Tom, sitting across from us, traced the rim of his coffee cup. So what do we do with it? I grinned. We let her bury herself. Mark made a few calls. A well-placed tip to a local reporter. A quiet word to a few disgruntled homeowners. A copy of the recording, anonymously sent to every HOA member's inbox. Then we sat back and watched. It didn't take long. By the next morning, the HOA's private email chain, which Karen controlled like a fortress, was on fire. Messages flooded in from furious homeowners. Are we seriously being extorted? Where is our HOA money going? We demand a financial audit. Karen responded the only way she knew how, by doubling down. A new notice appeared in Tom's mailbox. Final violation notice. Immediate payment required, $5,000. I whistled when Tom showed it to me. She's losing it. Mark nodded. She's desperate. When people like her feel power slipping, they try to grab more. It was time for the next phase. Mark had one more trick up his sleeve, an official FBI fraud investigation request. It wasn't a formal case yet, but just the suggestion of federal scrutiny was enough to make any corrupt HOA president sweat bullets. We made sure Karen found out about it. 2 days later, she stormed into the HOA's emergency meeting, looking like she hadn't slept in days. The other board members sat stiffly, avoiding her gaze. The room was packed. Homeowners who had once been afraid to challenge her now stared her down with outright hostility. Mark and I stood near the back watching. Tom sat beside us, Buddy's head resting on his knee. Karen cleared her throat, plastering on a tight-lipped smile. I understand there have been concerns. A neighbor stood up. Concerns? We just found out you've been lining your pockets with our money. Karen's smile faltered. That's a baseless accusation. I didn't even have to say anything. The recording played from someone's phone. Karen's own voice echoed through the room. If they don't pay, we put liens on their homes. HOA always gets its cut. The silence was absolute. Karen's face went pale. Then the shouting began. She tried to regain control, tried to lie, but it was over. The board members, who had been happy to follow her lead before, immediately distanced themselves, throwing her under the bus. I leaned toward Tom. She's done. He exhaled slowly. Good. But it wasn't just over for Karen. The entire HOA was under fire now, and the best part? The next phase was public humiliation. Karen sat stiffly at the front of the packed HOA meeting room, her fingers twitching against the stack of papers in front of her. The room buzzed with anger, thick enough to choke on. Every seat was filled, and more residents stood against the walls, arms crossed, waiting. She had ruled over this neighborhood for years with a smug smirk and an iron fist. But tonight, she looked smaller, her carefully curated authority unraveling before her eyes. Mark leaned toward me, his voice low and amused. She knows she's finished. Karen cleared her throat and forced a smile. I understand there have been some misunderstandings. Someone scoffed. Tom sat beside me, one hand resting on Buddy's back. His face was unreadable, but I knew better. He wasn't just here to watch her squirm. He was here to make sure no one else suffered under her reign again. A man in the second row stood up, arms folded. We don't misunderstand embezzlement, Karen. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's smile tightened. That's an unfounded accusation. I almost laughed. She was still trying. A woman near the back raised her phone. With a tap of her screen, Karen's own voice played out loud for everyone to hear. If they don't pay, we put liens on their homes. HOA always gets its cut. Asterisk. The room erupted. Shouting, accusations, decades of resentment crashing down in a single brutal wave. Karen slammed her hands on the table. This meeting is over. But she wasn't in charge anymore. A tall man in a suit, one of the HOA board members, stood up. His face was grim. No, Karen. You're over. She whirled toward him. You don't have the authority. We voted, he cut in. Effective immediately, you are removed as president. The breath she sucked in was sharp, like she'd been slapped. Mark, arms crossed, smirked. That's the least of your problems. Karen turned to him, eyes narrowing. Who the hell do you think you are? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a letter bearing the FBI's official seal. Her face drained of color. See, Mark said, stepping closer, it's one thing to be a petty dictator. It's another thing to commit fraud with federally protected funds. He glanced at the now former board members. The HOA collects fees under government oversight. Which means Karen here. She's looking at felony charges. The room went silent. Karen's breath came faster. That's ridiculous, Is it? Mark raised a brow. You stole HOA funds. Extorted homeowners. Filed false police reports. Harassed a disabled resident. He tilted his head. The only question is how much time you're gonna serve. She lost it. This is a witch hunt, she shrieked. I built this community. I made this place desirable. Someone near the back called out, then why's your house already listed for sale? Laughter broke out. Karen froze. Then, with wild eyes, she yanked out her phone and frantically started typing. Mark leaned over my shoulder, reading her screen. Looks like she's trying to scrub her accounts. Probably delete evidence. A wicked grin crossed his face. Too bad we already sent the files to law enforcement. Karen's phone slipped from her fingers. It clattered against the table. Tom finally spoke, his voice calm. You tried to take everything from me. She turned, breathing hard. He exhaled slowly. You lost. She knew it. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote. A full audit of the HOA's finances, a public apology to every resident, and an official withdrawal of every fine she'd ever issued. But the best part? That night a photo went viral. Karen, red-faced and furious, storming out of the HOA office, her name plastered across the news. Corrupt HOA president caught in explosive fraud scandal. Tom, Mark, and I sat on my porch watching the chaos unfold. Mark sipped his beer. Nothing better than watching a dictator fall. Buddy wagged his tail. Tom smiled. Guess she should have read the law. And just like that, the reign of Karen was over.